I am very, very excited for our Bike Equity Forum tonight. Let me first just offer my sincere gratitude to all of you for taking your time out to come discuss with us today. I think it is critically important for us to have this conversation and to have it not necessarily in the wake of a tragedy. I think that it is important for us to be forward-thinking in these conversations, that we should be proactive and not reactive, and that is why I think it's so important for us to be conducting this as well. I also want to point out what my staff member who oversees transportation in our office and who's responsible for putting this together, Jonathan Tim, if we could give it up for him. So if there's anything good about the event, tell me. If you have any complaints, tell Jonathan. Just kidding. So this, of course, is a critical issue, not just in our community, but in the entire city. And I do not drive. I don't have a driver's license. I also, here. All right. I'm also not a cyclist. There's no particular reason for that. I'm a big public transportation person. But we are a diverse community, and not everyone is a cyclist. Not everyone is a consumer of public transportation. Not everyone is a driver. We have some of all of that in this room tonight. And we also know that this is a hot button issue. The facts are that the deaths have increased markedly in this year, and there has to be a discussion around that. But we also know that in our communities, particularly our communities of color, that there has been natural resistance to infrastructure changes that I think are founded on real fears of displacement. And so what I'm asking everyone to do tonight is, wherever you fall on this spectrum, to be respectful. Be respectful. Note that your words matter. How you speak about people matters. And so I want us to be conscious, and I want to put that out in the front of the conversation so that we walk away from a civil discussion about a very critical and serious issue. So can everyone agree to do that tonight? Yes. All right, very good. Okay, so we are joined by some esteemed panelists, and the format of tonight is we're going to have them introduce themselves, introduce how they come to this work, introduce what they do. I have a couple of questions to get the conversation started, and then we're going to open it up to you for us to have a larger discussion about the issues. I also, on the outset, want to recognize that we have Ryan Greenlaw from City Bike here, who will be, he's not going to be on the panel, but has information on the discounted services that City Bike provides for those on SNAP and for our NYCHA residents. So I'm very glad. Thank you for coming out tonight. Okay, so I don't want to read through. I always think it's better to have the panelists introduce themselves. No one knows you better than yourself. So if we can, just go down the row. I'll give you the mic. Introduce yourself, your organization, what brought you to the work, and what you're doing now.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay, my name is Dulcie Kenton, and I'm the Brooklyn organizer for Transportation Alternatives. What's that? Stand up? Oh, sure. So my name is Dulcie Kenton. I'm the Brooklyn organizer for Transportation Alternatives. We're a nonprofit pedestrian and cycling advocacy agency in New York City. I came to this work. I actually became a member of Transportation Alternatives in 2011. I started cycling to work because I was working in the gig economy. So one day I'll be walking a dog or modeling or whatever may have you, and the trains and the buses just sucked. So I got on a bike and started riding. With my biking, just starting out by myself, I got acclimated with rules of the road through Bike New York, and then biking with groups like Women's Empowerment through Bicycling and Black Girls Do Bike. I really took on another role. I was like, wow, this is great, it's free, we should be doing more of this. Fast forward to August 2014, while biking home with a friend from Bushwick to Bed-Stuy, I was hit by a car, hit and run crash, broke my right shoulder, my left ankle, I had a major concussion. I was in hospital for 3 days. Nothing happened to the driver. Consequently, my mother was also a victim of a hit-and-run crash in 2001 in the Bronx, so I kind of felt like this is my cause, this is why I do the work that I do. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ogun Alcide. I'm a project manager with the Bicycle Unit in New York City DOT. Just a bit of background about myself. I graduated from City College with a bachelor's in engineering. So just coming into New York City DOT, I started as an intern in 2014. And at that point, I had no experience with cycling. And actually, one of my first intern tasks was to learn to ride a bike. So I went with Bike NYC, and that was like one of my first tasks. And since then, I've been really trying to get more comfortable on a bike and get out around the city. And also helps that I design bike lanes for a living. So that's just like a bit of information about me and my experience with biking.
Good evening, and thanks for having this event tonight. My name is Eric McClure. I'm the executive director of an organization called Streets Pact, which is a political action committee launched in 2013 to help elect public officials who support pro-safe streets and pro-public transit policies. One of those people was then candidate Senator Myrie in 2018, who I'm proud to say we endorsed for his race in the state senate, and he made us proud by winning. So I'm here tonight. I got involved in safe streets advocacy back in around 2005. I left a career in the advertising business and met a couple of guys who were advocates and really cared about this kind of thing. And it was something I hadn't really thought that much about, but as I learned more, I got on into doing this kind of work. The rest is history. One of my Streets Pact colleagues, Paco Abraham, is here. We co-founded the organization with several other people in 2013. So looking forward to the discussion, and I do have to say that I am thrilled to be in the minority here, both racially and gender-wise. Too many of bicycle forums around the city are dominated by white men, so it's great to be a part of a panel where I'm not here to dominate.
Hello everybody, good evening. My name is Angela Azzolino. I am the Executive Director of Get Women Cycling. We are a bike community advocacy program that focuses on the female identifying non-gender conforming individuals to provide them resources and support for anyone in that demographic or anyone who supports our cause to get them on bicycles should they have the will. To learn how to ride a bike or commute by bike in New York City, but also to support those who are already outside biking in New York. And how I got involved in this, I'm not really sure. Maybe it's similar to Dulce, where you just kind of know it's your path. I was bike riding ever since I was 16 when my uncle gave me his Schwinn varsity 10-speed. And I basically didn't stop. After working for corporate for 25 years or so, I left it and started to work in a bicycle shop in Brooklyn. And I think once I was in the bicycle shop, I saw firsthand where there were gaps within the population that I serve now. So female identifying, non-gender conforming individuals are having a hard time getting their needs met, and has nothing to do with the ownerships per se for the bicycles, but it's a much larger discrepancy in industry, in politics, in advocacy, etc. And thank you for mentioning that. So that's where I fall into this. So, thank you.
Great, so why don't we start off? I think it is part of the reason why this conversation has become, I think, a lot more prevalent today is the unfortunate reality that we are seeing more cyclists killed. And I'm wondering if you guys can speak to what you believe that is attributed to this almost double the amount of cyclists that have lost their lives this year as opposed to last year.
I think something to keep in mind when we look at these increases increase in cyclist deaths. It's just an increase in cyclists in general in New York City. Since we started to develop the bike network, cycling in general has increased significantly. And just with that and the lack of infrastructure in certain areas, I think has created a bit of a gap between the facilities that we provide and the number of cyclists that are out on the street. And I think that's something that we definitely need to address.
I definitely agree with that. More people are biking, so the crashes are up. Speaking for myself, I live in Bed-Stuy, and like when I moved there 8 years ago, I was maybe one of a handful of people that were biking. Now I'm seeing more city bikes, many people biking, but like she said, the infrastructure doesn't add up. Like I think 15 out of the cyclists that were killed.
Bluetooth connected.
I believe 15 of the cyclists that were killed this year, it happened in like South Brooklyn. Yeah, how do you say
Just to add on to that,
Bluetooth disconnected. Bluetooth connected.
so strange.
That's Alexa.
I do feel like that while the numbers in cyclists are increasing, we are seeing.
Bluetooth disconnected.
So annoying.
If folks can hear us without the mic, we could.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you just do that? Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Hello. Check. Okay. Yeah, so there's the increase in the number of people bicycle riding, and we are seeing the increase in infrastructure, but what we're noticing is that a lot of these accidents or crashes are occurring in areas where there isn't any infrastructure, and I just want to speak a little bit about the patterns that I see when I'm on the street. I'm also a licensed driver, so I get behind the wheel too, and I'm very observant about what is going on since I'm in this space. And I speak to licensed drivers and those who are going for their driver's license for the last 3 years. I've been doing that, so I have a good understanding from what that perspective is like. And what we're seeing is that on those streets where there are bike lanes of any kind, traffic does move much slower as opposed to those that don't have any sort of line markings for bicycling. And even all of us here in the crowd, maybe when you're riding your bike from one corner to the other, if you turn off and there's suddenly a street where you're no longer in a place where there's markings for cyclists, you can just feel the energy of those vehicles swinging by you, moving by you. So I think that definitely has something to do with it. And then just a general lack of an awareness, or lack of awareness, and we probably will talk more about that later.
The only thing I would add is that, as has been pointed out, a significant percentage of the deaths this year have occurred in places where there was no real good bike infrastructure. The City Council today passed a real landmark bill called the Streets Master Plan, which was introduced by Speaker Corey Johnson and will mandate and set benchmarks for a significant increase in the number of protected bike lane miles, as well as protected bus lanes and a whole host of other changes to the city streets. But that won't start to kick in for a while, but it will eventually help make a big difference.
Yeah, let me just say that I knew that it would pass on this day. So when we planned it, way back when, we knew that it would coincide with the historic legislation. Now, you mentioned about poor infrastructure, and I'm wondering if we could speak to, we know that there has been inequity in transportation historically, and I'm wondering if you can speak to what inequities still exist in cycling today.
And your question is, do we know where it stems from, and where does it exist today?
Yeah, just speak to whatever you perceive that or those inequities to be in cycling, whether that be, where do you think that comes from where you see it?
Well, I can speak to, and we'll just talk about the demographic that we mainly focus on, so that's female identifying, non-gender conforming. I know that the gap still exists. Why it's there, that I can't speak to. I mean, generally the manufacturers and companies that produce materials and equipment and clothing are male, and they've been producing products for men. The shops that exist in local communities are mostly male-owned. Recently, in the last, say since 2012, we're seeing more either male-female, either partners, or there's now a couple in New York, female-owned specifically shops, and that is helpful because now we being this demographic, can go to these places and see products that are focused on our needs and prominently displayed, not in some corner in the back of the shop. So that certainly has something to do with it. Also, people's perceptions, so my demographic's perceptions of what it means to be on a bicycle. Am I fit enough? Do I have the proper clothing? I don't want to wear spandex. Am I fast enough? Because what we are seeing, what we have been seeing in marketing and in the shops again, on the streets, are mostly, at least up until probably, since 2013, I would say, when city bikes started to come into New York, is when we really got a taste of what the commuter cyclist is. Other than that, it was the racer, the triathlete, or the one that was going around in the park. So there was no way to connect oneself to this particular area, to the space.
I do think if you take a look at the bicycle map of New York City, you will definitely see that there are disparities in the way that the bike network covers the city. Some of that is for good reason, and the same actually goes for City Bike. If you look at the City Bike deployment to date, it's similar to the bike map. Very concentrated in Manhattan, Northwest Brooklyn, and far less in the way of bike infrastructure, sort of extending out from the Northwest. But you also have historic routes like the Ocean Parkway bike path, which has been there for more than 100 years. In the case of City Bike, and in a lot of cases with the bicycle lane network, those things are done the way they've been done for a reason, to connect the network. So you don't have bike lanes that deliver you at a corner where there's no bike lane to continue on. With City Bike, you need a density in a connected network, so when you take a bike, there's some place to drop it off. If you have no docks in a 2-mile space and then another group of docks beyond that, it's not really conducive to a well-functioning bike share system. So those are some issues, but certainly that disparity has managed to not serve communities of color, communities of lower income, as well as it served some of the more affluent neighborhoods in the city, no doubt.
I think something that I've noted, just in the planning process, and just on some of the projects that I've been able to work on, particularly in the priority bicycle areas, that's like in southern Brooklyn. I think one thing we've noted is that a lot of these areas were traditionally heavily focused on facilitating commercial traffic, and I think as those areas continue to develop and more people are moving into those areas, that doesn't necessarily match the needs of the community. I mean, commercial traffic is important, and making sure that people can get their goods is important. But when you have housing developments right next to areas with heavy truck traffic, I think that's something that takes time to look at, and also you have to address the commercial traffic, but you also have to redevelop how those streets are moving to match the new population that's moving to those areas. So that's just something that I've noted.
And to cap off what everybody said, I agree. It's it's a miracle I'm even still biking today. I really think I'm still doing it because I was really enjoying it for a good 3 years. If I was just like 3 months in the game and you threw all them injuries on me, I would have never gotten on a bike again. You know, there's that. It's the lack of women cycling. We tend to get most of the household chores, picking up kids, dropping off. You know, City Bike doesn't offer like a cargo bike or even like a bike that you can carry a child on, so that's an issue. I see one of my colleagues here, Brown Bike Girl, in the audience. I live in Bed-Stuy, and it's like my work commute from my home on Bed-Stuy to my office at John Street. It's relatively easy. It's 30 minutes, and you have some sort of bike lane, you know, protecting you. But when I go out to East New York, that's another story. I'll get on the Eastern Parkway, make a right on Ralph. It's kind of hairy, and then Pitkin Avenue is a little crazy, but we need to have more of those facilities. If people don't feel safe, they're just not going to take this up.
Thank you very much. Now, and after this question, I think we're going to kick it to the audience because we want to make sure that we get out of here in time. Part of, I think, why this issue is a not simple one is because there are a lot of misconceptions. And I think that the misconceptions, as we know, people say perception is reality. Misconception can morph into reality as well. And I'm wondering if you guys can speak to what do you think some of the biggest misconceptions about cycling in Brooklyn are, and can you help correct that misconception if possible? It's an easy question.
I think one misconception that I've identified through just outreach with the community, presentations, comments that I've gotten back, is definitely the idea that, particularly in New York City DOT, isn't looking at these areas or isn't interested in developing these areas and putting more bike lanes in these areas. It's not as simple as, we identify a route and we put it in. There's so much else that goes into the project planning process, the engineering process, and just like actually physically implementing it. So I think if people understand and can be more realistic about like the timeline of a project, I think they'll see that we are working to develop the network, but it's a matter of making sure that we're putting something in that makes the most sense for the street and for the people who are going to be using it.
I have 3 comments on that. And one is that it's elitist, which for a long time I can see why that could be the misconception. That it's dangerous. And we lead the talk about the increase in the number of fatalities for people on bicycles, but in my tenure here at Get Women Cycling, we've noticed that actually more people are being seriously injured and killed while walking in crosswalks. And the second demographic is those that are in cars, whether they're drivers or passengers, they're actually being seriously injured and killed more than those of us on bicycles. That's a hard argument to turn around, because what we're seeing in the news and what the hot topics are related to bicycles, but there's definitely an argument to say this, there are risks, but there are risks also when you walk, and there are risks also when you drive or take mass transit, so that's a misconception as well. And then the other is that it's just difficult. To get on a bicycle and to commute in a city as big and grand as New York City is intimidating, and it's difficult and maybe not worth the effort. And while it is hard at the beginning, like Dulce said, had she not stuck with it for the amount of time that she did, it's easy just to say, it's not for me. It's scary. It's a lot of work. There's resources now that more than ever. That we have in New York City to actually, and they're very niche oriented. So whether you're a person who is suffering from Disabilities, we do have bicycles now that are out on the market where you can find one that suits your needs. And there's resources out there to help you, readily available, and we'll be happy to talk to you if you want that. Affordability is so easy to find a bicycle that's affordable. We have the Brooklyn Bike Co-op, the Mechanical Gardens Bike Co-op here. Brown Bike Girl also has her education outreach. Transportation Alternatives Bike New York, at Women's Cycling, We Bike. I mean, there's so many out there. And we can fit it within your budget and within your needs. So I think the misconceptions stem from the thinking from not that far away. In the we've only really started to have these resources and changes in the infrastructure and even in policy very, very recently, less than 10 years, I would say. So we're here to help.
I think one of the major misconceptions is that, and I would flatter myself and say that most of the biking in New York City is being done by people who look like me, but I think the misconception is the people who look like I might have looked 30 years ago. And it's just not really the case. I mean, yes, demographically, men still represent the majority of cyclists in New York City, but there's an enormous contingent of working cyclists who are predominantly immigrants, Latinx or Chinese descent, who have come to the city to work. They tend to literally work in the shadows because they're looking food at night, trying to make a buck, always running into people who say, "Oh, my food's cold, I'm not going to tip you," and try because they have more work than they can handle and difficult, very difficult working conditions. I also, my wife does a job where she works with horses, and most of that's on Long Island, and it's not easily done by public transit, so she drives a lot. And because it's horses, it's early in the morning, so she drives down Eastern Parkway. We live in Park Slope, and has been doing this for a number of years, early in the morning. And she would often come home at night and say, there are a ton of African-American men who are on bikes early in the morning that I see when I'm driving on Eastern Parkway. And you bike advocates, she likes to pigeonhole it. You need to figure out how to get them involved in advocacy. And of course, everybody has jobs. They're working to make ends meet. Not everybody has the opportunity to go to public meetings in the evening and a schedule that will accommodate that. But there are a lot of diverse people on bicycles in New York City, and it's not just a spandex thing, for sure.
Yeah, I really didn't know how this whole process worked until, when my mom was hit in 2001, that was a whole big to-do. The police did nothing. Only recourse was a lawyer. I knew when I got hit, I didn't even have a bed in the emergency room. I had a lawyer already because I flashed back to what happened to her. But I think there's a total gap of what people know. Like both my parents were working class. They came from the Caribbean. They didn't have time to go to these meetings. I didn't even know this stuff existed. This is all new to me. And if that's just me, I can imagine, there's more people in the community like us. We probably want to know more, but we just don't have the time. Like, I think one night I was in Flatbush and I saw a sister. She was on the bike and she had groceries. And then she's looking at me. She's like, "I gotta make it, sis. I gotta make it." I said, "I know, but yeah."
Good, thank you very much. So we have, over here on this map, we asked folks to come in and place where they thought there were cycling issues or transportation issues. And so we're obviously not gonna go through each dot, but as you can see, it is pretty widespread through the district. There seems to be a heavy concentration in the PLG, Crown Heights area. Two of the cyclists that I feel like it's a game show. Right? So two of the cyclists that unfortunately lost their lives. One was in Sunset Park, Fernando Trejo, and one was in Brownsville, Ernest Sue. And we see that we have challenges throughout. And so I'm hoping that we can I'm going to kick it to the crowd now for Q&A, and those questions can be directed at anyone on the panel. And you can can either talk about your particular issue that you put up there, or any general comment, questions that you have on this issue. Okay, so we'll start with you, and if you don't mind, if you could share your name and maybe your neighborhood before you answer.
My name's Leah, and this is my neighbor in Crown Heights, born and raised.
Please stand up.
One question. I'm a cyclist and a driver. I was a driver first, and as a young person, getting back and forth to college. My father, however, was always a cyclist. Bus driver and driver as well, but always a cyclist, so I was aware that it existed. I just never got into commuting until I had to go into the city to go to work. Now, that long story aside, I understand what people brought up as issues, but one thing I didn't hear is enforcement against drivers who already break pre-existing laws. Like, you don't need to do much. That costs almost nothing. Like, we're talking about infrastructure changes, and those take years, and community board approval and things like that, but how can we get our police officers to enforce the laws that are already on the books? Thank you very much.
Okay, Mo.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Mo. I'm probably standing for this. Yeah. I bike a lot, bike everywhere pretty much. In rain, snow, cold. And I thank you guys very much for coming in here today and talking about the different things you guys are doing to increase safety for bikers. One of the disparities that I've noticed in general, and based on policies that have been introduced right now by the city council, advocated by the state government as well, is that a lot of the changes we've already seen in predominantly gentrified neighborhoods that have a lot of white settlers or money. Pop Slope is an example because as I right there, I noticed the bike lanes are separated from the street, and there's a car between you, and you have your own bike lane. So even though in my neighborhood right now, in East Flatbush, we have bike lanes, but I still don't feel safe, right? Because the cars are still flying by me. There's only a white line that's separating me from the cars. So I was wondering if you guys have any thoughts or anything that you want to share on that topic.
I'm glad you pointed out the separate bike lanes, the ones protected by vehicles. We just put in an example of that on Fountain Avenue in southeast Brooklyn. So it's definitely something we're exploring. We're always looking for potential streets where this design would be most suited, because we understand that for not just for you, but for anyone who has a varying level of comfort on a bike, they might feel more protected behind some kind of vertical element. So when we're choosing our routes and we're choosing our designs, that's definitely something we consider first. We always look to, can this be protected by vertical elements? Will this roadway physically allow that? Or is there some other element that we can use to protect cyclists, as opposed to just providing what you mentioned, providing a standard bike lane. But that's not to say that standard bike lanes aren't part of providing a robust bike network. For some slower streets, say a neighborhood street that has lower vehicle traffic, we might want to put in a standard bike lane because it provides a connection. And I believe that for someone who's living in a neighborhood, and I'm sure if you're a cyclist, you identify streets with lower traffic and slower speeds, where you might feel comfortable biking on there just without any bike facility, because you know how people are moving through the area. And so it comes down to how wide the street is, how traffic is moving there, to making sure that we're picking a design that suits the area, essentially.
I wanted to just get back to we'll come back to that in a second. I wanted to, the question about enforcement, we're big fans of automated enforcement because it's unbiased. The city and Senator Myrie was one of the senators who voted in favor of the expansion of the New York City speed camera program, which has now started to roll out the last few months, has had a tremendous effect already. As cameras come online, the number of tickets skyrockets, and then it begins to drop because most drivers, probably 90% of drivers, never get a second speed camera ticket because they learn, oh, I need to slow down. There are some scofflaws who keep it up, and I guess they don't mind paying the $50 over and over again, but it really seems to be effective, and we hope, and there is starting to be some legislation percolating about the potential of bike lane cameras, which would enforce against parking or standing your car in a bike lane. So I think there are some ways to do that don't involve actually having the police need to do it. That would be our preference. On the bike lane question, so part of my ride over here was on the Prospect Park West Bike Path, which is an amazing protected bike path. And I would say that was an easy one, which would be true from the standpoint of the engineering, because Prospect Park West was 5 lanes wide, 1 lane of parking on either side, and 3 travel lanes with ridiculous speeding pretty much at all hours. It was incredibly difficult from a fight standpoint, because a group of people in the neighborhood sued to try to stop it. The lawsuit dragged on for 6 years before they finally threw in the towel and withdrew the lawsuit. And I was very involved in that from the beginning in proposing that the DOT try to do something like that, to be the public face of a lot of the fight for it, to pulling out my hair for 6 years while the lawsuit was still there threatening it. But so that was easy from an engineering standpoint. A lot of other places are narrower and not so easy to engineer without taking away significant amounts of parking, which is a topic for another night probably, because parking always gets people riled up. So.
Sorry, I just wanted to, again, speak to both of your questions on. We speak a lot about the electronic enforcement, and we know that there's more coming. The 14th Street Busway now, that has just been implemented, also has the electronic cameras. And there's apps where we can do our own policing, not so much for speeding, but you might have heard about the bots that are out there for anyone who is in a bike lane parked illegally, or actually just parked illegally, where you can snap a picture of the license plates, upload it, and then the owner of that car gets a ticket for illegally parking. So I assume that we'll see more of this type of electronic enforcement, which is great. But also we need awareness and we need education, right? And that's pretty much what we have been advocating for the last 3 years. And directly to the motorists, as I said, I'm a licensed driver, and so I'm actively engaged in this with this audience. And for you, sir, on those streets in East New York where there aren't any protected bike lanes, I'm in Sunset Park, there aren't any there either, except Roll Now, there is a long time coming. I think it's about education and visibility. So in the areas where there are not a lot of cyclists in general, people who are driving cars may not necessarily know what to do with this marked line in the street, and it's up to us, I think, to help educate them. It's up to us to communicate with any of the people that we're interacting with on the street, whether it's a person walking, a person driving the car, to have eye contact and to make it a point that we're seen and we're here, to just get to wherever we need to go as well. So that's how we've been working at this dilemma, and it seems to be well received on both sides.
Okay, I think we're going to go to the person right next to Mo.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ethel Tias, Chair of CBA, and I'd like to suggest that for the bike lanes, the protected bike lanes are the way to go. If the street is wide enough, that should be the first shot. Put roller parked cars between the bike lane and the sidewalk. In other words, the bike lane should be closest to the sidewalk. And if you can, change the state laws to allow cyclists to ride on the sidewalk at the nighttime, where it's not a problem, you don't have a lot of pedestrians, okay? That would be safer. You would allow drivers to still keep their parking spaces if you're letting cyclists use the sidewalks at night. There are a lot of other suggestions that I have, but I want to hear from my neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we have Greg next.
Greg in the back row.
Greg in the back row.
Thank you, Ethel, by the way. I'm also on the community board, community board 8, that is. And I just kind of want to shift gears a little bit. I know, rightfully so, most of the discussion here has been very nitty-gritty and personal experience-based, and I'm a cyclist for 40 years, so I have a lot of cumulative scars and bruises and bike accidents. But I want to shift gears away from all that and kind of look at a kind of macro level. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has basically said that we've got until 2030 to fix this gas emissions, these climate emission problems. If we don't, we're going to basically get in a situation with no return of runaway climate change. And why we all try to suss out how we're going to physically on the ground to address this. At the large level, we're under a lot of pressure. We know from the New York Times that the largest single source of climate gases in the United States are what they call tailpipe emissions, which is to say cars. And a car emits somewhere 2 or 3 times its weight every year in climate gases and takes up probably 40 square feet on the road versus perhaps 5 for a bike. So for many, many levels at a policy level, I think it's in the interest of the city and the council to aggressively promote non-car-oriented transportation. And how that plays out at the macro level, or probably at the micro level of protected bike lanes, cameras, et cetera, and so on, I think are something we need to suss out. And I just think that we should put this definitely on the front burner, not let ourselves get bogged down in the nitty-gritty and just realize that this is a full court press, front and center, get it done, and don't wait, make it happen. Thank you.
And I, of course, will remind folks to be as brief as you can, only because we have a lot of folks that want to offer some comments and questions, and I want to give everyone that opportunity to be heard.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah, and I know this is a bike equity forum, and I was hoping that we can engage in a dialogue about equity on all fronts. Not minimizing the risk of drivers. Yes, we have some dangerous drivers out here. But I think as we move forward, we need to think about the safety of bicyclists, those who ride bicycles. We need to think about the elderly. We need to think about drivers. We need to think about everyone who lives in this city, particularly Brooklyn, since we are in Brooklyn. Because as we move forward, we're putting things in place, and I'm not so sure that our vision is broad enough. And let me just use the protected bike lanes, which I think is good. But I think about when I try to let my mother out the car in the evening, and I have to let her out on the side of a protected bike lane, and I'm looking, trying to be cautious, no bike. All of a sudden, somebody zooms by, no lights. And I'm saying that's not across the board. But when I think about the elderly and the challenges that we face for those of us who have to transport them, I'd like us to think about all aspects of protecting everybody. Because there are instances where we don't all follow the rules. Drivers, bicyclists, and pedestrians. And there's a lot of literature that I see around, and it always speaks to the drivers, and it never speaks to pedestrians following the laws, bicyclists following the laws. So I'm encouraging all of us as we continue this discussion, because we're going down the road that we're going down, that we open it up and be mindful of what we put in place, and that is safe for everyone, and that everyone is represented and can live comfortably in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have on the notation, John in the black hat. Is that you?
Yeah, Charles, but I'll talk.
Okay. All right.
I am a driver trainer. I used to train ambulance drivers in the military. I haven't gotten on a bicycle in over 20-something years. I'm not a rider. I don't take the trains. I don't get on buses. I'm a car man. By the time I was 15, I was already a legendary street racer, fixing cars and chasing them all over the place. But I'd like to say that one of the biggest misconceptions is that a bicycle is like a pedestrian. Bicycles are vehicles. Once you get on a bike and you begin to ride, you're piloting something much like a driver. And there need to be much more training and information for bicyclists. Just like I think there need to be much more training and information for drivers. Many drivers should have to go back to remedial courses, mandatory, every maybe 2 or 3 years. But much of the tone I'm hearing is so anti-motorist. It's really negative if you begin to develop this as a sort of a driver versus bicyclist dialogue. Because another misconception is that bicycling is daily news, just one paper every day. You realize that every day, at least 4, 5, 6 motorists are killed. And over the course of the year, last year, 36,000 motorists were killed in the United States alone, with over 10 million injuries. I'm working on a book now about defensive driving, so I've been looking at all of these statistics. So they haven't even built decent roads in New York since Robert Moses' days. I noticed that the construction they're doing for bicycle lanes, very head-scattered, very willy-nilly. They're putting up no-turn signs all over the city that's reducing streets to 1 lane instead of 3 lanes. That's creating more congestion, more pollution from cars, and all of that. I think there need to be more underpasses. They can actually use better infrastructure for both cars and cyclists in this city, and more thought, more futuristic thought in terms of, for example, they should have a tunnel built 30 years ago, taking traffic from New Jersey under Manhattan to Queens. Because much of the traffic that's going to Long Island have to come out of the Lincoln Tunnel or the Holland Tunnel, go across Manhattan Island, then go back into another tunnel or go over a bridge just to go to Queens or Long Island. So the planning in the city is very poor. All they concentrate on is finding drivers more and more money, and you go to court, you can't even win a ticket. The police is always right 99% of the times. And that's because motorists are not organized as a voting lobby, as a voting group. So they beat up on motorists for every single thing, and that's wrong. But bicycles has to be considered a vehicle. They have to train bicycles better. They have to make bicycles have brakes on all bikes, lights on all bikes, or reflectors, and obey the laws. Too many bicyclists riding on the street, they have no brakes, they have no lights, they're dressed in black at night, you can hardly see them, and when they get run over, they want to blame somebody. So these things have to be addressed.
Thank you, Charles, in the black hat. Let me also say, to the point of bike lights, we had some bike lights donated by Campbell with us tonight. So if you are in need, please reach out to us. Jonathan is holding them out in team with our game show. There we go. All right, very good. I know that Tosi wanted to respond very quickly, and apologies to the panelists. I'm trying to get as many folks as possible.
Yes, I just wanted to say one known fact. A lot of people don't know this. I didn't know this too. You know, I don't like to identify as a cyclist or a motorist. I'm a person first and foremost, and we all walk. We're all pedestrians. Also, with cars and bikes, I mean, many people don't know, before we used to be on horses and carriages, and they had cobblestone streets. Then they invented the bicycle. And it was because of people who bike that they asked to pave roads, and it made it easier for cars. It's once Henry Ford and Model T, that was all she wrote. But I just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I may mispronounce this. Yoni or Yanni? Yoni, please.
I could try to just speak loud. I wanted to talk to the lady at the DOT. Do you mind your name? Okay, thank you. The reason why you feel perceived anger from a lot of people who ride a bike is because I think, speaking to you with the hat, we aren't a vehicle, we cyclists, and we aren't pedestrians. And I think that it's time to imagine a third type of being on the road that is not a car and not a pedestrian, and it's a cyclist. And the law that is written for cars is written for cars for the ways that they drive, the speeds that they drive, the way that their brakes work. you know, the way they could stop at a light in the middle of the rain or the winter and not care if there's a minute of a red light or whatever. And I think the reason we get angry is because what happens, especially under de Blasio's Vision Zero, is that he just threw cops at the problem. We don't want cops. We don't like them. They don't like us. They harass us. They, at minimum, they don't give a damn about us. At max, they actively are fighting, trying to run us over, like Officer Paperman in the city. There was that thing. And they just, in general, they obviously harass. They have a bias towards certain groups of cyclists. They have less of a bias towards others. But recently it came out that I think they ticket, of the tickets that they gave out this year, 22% went to bicyclists and the rest went to drivers. So that's 22% of tickets go to bicyclists when we're max a share of 6% of the road. That's categorical prejudice against cyclists. And I think we looked at DOT to separate us physically, so we don't have to worry about getting into fights with drivers. We don't have to worry about cops enforcing laws for drivers because we can just go our own way by infrastructure and less by cops enforcing and ticketing and harassing and being biased. And you know, I think so. And I think that what happens is when a road is paved, and then there is a month or 2 month delay, and then you know, painting of back a lane or doing that. That's where a lot of that frustration. Now I know you don't represent the whole DOT. I'm just trying to speak to why you said a misconception is that, you know, there's a lot of anger, we don't think you care. Maybe you do care, but the way that it's externalized, what we get, how we see, how our lived experience trying to avoid death, police, drivers, we don't want to hit pedestrians either. You know, we just want to get where we're going, as you said. And so, you know, I think that's where a lot of that frustration that you're seeing.
Make sure you respond. It's like the presidential debate.
I just want to say I can definitely appreciate that frustration. Like I said before, I'm a person who spent most of her life not being on a bike, not being comfortable with a bike. The idea of getting on a bike and going next to vehicles was something that always terrified me. But I'm combating that every day. And when I personally design projects, I always consider what's most comfortable for someone. But something to consider is that, like, when we're designing our projects, we're trying to take into account all modes. When we're coming in with some of our bike lane projects, it's the opportunity then to see the road. And there are some streets in New York, and particularly in Brooklyn, that haven't been touched since 2008. Even later, I've seen drawings from 1994 that shows that no one, redesigned that street since then. So we have this special opportunity to make not just bike improvements, but pedestrian improvements, but also, like, can this be redesigned to match the capacity, to match what's needed on the street? Like, for a street that's 60 foot wide, in some areas, and the population has changed. There's not as many drivers, but it's still a 60-foot wide street, and people are still crossing those 60-foot wide streets, and nothing has been changed. I think that's where we have the opportunity to make a real difference and change how people use that street. I can definitely appreciate that frustration, but just know that we do care, and we're trying to change that.
Thank you. Okay, so it is 7:30. We're trying to wrap by 8, and we have 10 more people that are in the queue. All right, so I just want to give everyone the perspective, and I see Portia walking over with more. So again, I just want to emphasize, and I know this is too short a span for us to have a full conversation, but if you can, be brief. So the next person is Carrie Tan. Okay, yes. The lightning round. Right.
Okay, I wrote my points down, bullet points, I can go fast. So I just want to compound on what my neighbor here said about the police and like you said, the frustration with, I used to be frustrated by the lack of enforcement. I think I've gotten to the point where I have just written that off as an impossibility. Just to put a data point on it, I know a lot of us commute on Dean Street past 6th Avenue, and as we know, the 78th Precinct and the FDNY there use Dean Street as a parking lot, despite the fact that they have their own parking parking lot that they refuse to use for some reason. I'll never understand, but that just goes to show, like, it's really dangerous on that section of Dean Street for everyone involved. So I like the idea of automated enforcement where we don't have to rely on the NYPD at all. If we could have that on dedicated bus lanes as well, because then we could all move around faster, that'd be great. I also want to raise the idea of day fines, which is when if you run a red light, for instance, the fine that you incur is actually scaled to your income level, because a rich person getting a $50 ticket means nothing to them, but to a poor person who's trying to get to work, that could be, they could land in jail, actually, for not being able to pay. So that's another thing. And then I also want to raise the point that I personally sort of theorize that a lot of the uptick in cyclist deaths we're seeing are actually a result of there being more cars than ever in New York City. And I know I have read that being attributed to the rise in rideshare. So I just want to put a pin in it that like reducing the number of cars in New York City should be, it would benefit all of us. And one part of doing that, I think, and this is where things get real controversial, is our street space is so limited. It's such a precious public resource. For me, I cannot understand why we are giving up so much of it for subsidized free parking. This is a city built around transit, and it would solve all of our problems, congestion-wise, safety, pollution, climate change, all of this, if we could reclaim some of that public space back for people instead of vehicles.
Before I get to Eric, that is the preview of the parking forum, which will be not controversial at all.
Coming soon to a forum near you. Just a quick point on the police and enforcement. I really would encourage people to take advantage of your police precinct community council meetings. I have had some experience with engaging with the police over enforcement issues, and if they see you on a regular basis and you show up to precinct council meetings and start to engage them in dialogue about the way that they do enforcement, encourage them to put some cops on bikes, it really can make a difference in the way that they perceive people on bicycles or pedestrians and help to change the conversation. It's not going to happen overnight, it takes persistence, but I really would encourage you to engage with your local precinct if you can. And on the fines idea, I think that's great. There's one, I remember reading one Scandinavian country where somebody who was speeding in a Maserati was hit with an $80,000 ticket because he had the means to pay it, and that seems somewhat justified.
Thank you. We are going next to Lee Burnett, who is the Chair of Transportation for Community Board 17.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
For the last 13 years, I've been chairing the Transportation Committee in CB Board, CB 17. And I do want to acknowledge my friend here, Mr. Bray, whom I've been working with a lot on a lot of these things in my community. Right now we're in discussion. My committee is in discussion about what we can do to increase the safety pattern or do what's necessary to inform or educate our community residents on safety bike riding in our perimeter of CB 17. So I invite much of you to probably consider the same thing. This is not the last of what we're going to hear about, bike riding. I've been riding, I started riding at 7 years old. So, and I was just 67 5 days ago.
Happy birthday.
So, thank you. So, it is going to be an ongoing discussion. I'm not going to take much time to say a whole lot, but we got to get back to this, Myrie. A lot of the things that you're touching on here is quite valid and worthwhile looking into further. Everybody will need to meet a certain degree of inconvenience You know, the one thing that I stress all the time, I just had one of my committee members walking home from a meeting that got struck by a car in the middle of the crosswalk, broken leg, wound up in Kings and downstate medical. She's not home, nursing a broken ankle. Motorist claimed that she didn't see her. She just sideswiped her and kept going. So I stress that all the time in my committee meetings. The bike lanes situation, I work in Park Slope, and not too long ago, there was a situation where some biker got killed down in the Sunset Park area. And soon enough, you all were out there and changed the pattern of the bike lanes along 4th Avenue, where they moved it from the outside to the inside. And I'll point out this much to you, because I park in the area, I have private parking, but when the others park, the only thing is that now, when the motorists open their door, they're opening it to the traffic. And that's another safety issue. So I invite you to pay attention to that, to wait to let the traffic go by, and then you open your door to the outside. By moving the bike lane on the inside, which I almost got struck a couple of times, like the lady there mentioned, bikers that just zip by and you don't even see them coming, you know, without lights and all of that. So increase your level of safety and observation. Look around you, take observation of what's happening around you before you make certain moves or certain decisions to access your vehicle or whatever the case may be. We'll talk more about this, Myrie, down the line. And Mr. Bray, I thank you for being here this evening. I'll see you more on the Remsen Avenue bike lanes that was introduced to us recently. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Next, we have Adam White. Adam left? Oh, man. Another cue. I have Dan Miller, front row.
Hey, thanks. I just wanted to keep this brief, but I guess my question is about, a lot of the time it feels like bike safety infrastructure has to be kind of yanked out of the city or the state, and it doesn't go, it's kind of like we don't want to make it as effective as it could be. And a great example of this is speed cameras, which was a giant fight to get them done. And I'm super glad they're in, but they're only near schools, and B, they turn off at 10 p.m. And we know that this safety infrastructure is really effective. You can see it in graphs that the number of speeding cars goes down over time. Why is my life worth less if I'm coming home late? I don't get it.
It unfortunately has been a real piecemeal process to get cameras expanded. When take a nod to the Democrats in the state Senate when they took control in 2018 or the beginning of 2019. They got this done and significantly expanded the program. Because of the number of schools in New York City and the number of cameras, and they're no longer restricted to just one camera per school, they can have multiple cameras. Because of the density of schools, most of the city will end up being covered by speed cameras, which is great news. Unfortunately, the time limit, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. still exists Monday through Friday, but that's going to be the next fight that we're fighting all day, I think.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Mrs. Rose. Yep. All right.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
As you can see, I am a senior citizen with a cane, and I have been a homeowner. Oh, sorry. Again, my name is Mrs. Ross, R-O-S-S. And as you can see, I am a super senior with a cane, all right? And I've been a homeowner here for over 50 years. I moved into this neighborhood in Crown Heights because it was a lovely residential neighborhood with families and children. The cycle has turned a lot of the children, when I was first here, they were children are now have their own children, of course, but we have a new group of young children coming in. And on my block alone, we have a good 15 new children from like 6 and under. And they're out there with their scooters and they're doing all kinds of wonderful, wonderful things. I'm very happy to see them. So I'm very concerned about the emphasis only on the needs of the bicyclists. I know they are very needy and they're very useful and all that. And of course, some cities and other countries, they're plentiful. That's how everyone gets around. But here in New York, I have to go to my doctors. And I have some in Manhattan, some in Brooklyn, downtown. So vehicles are essential for me, and there are many others in my community that have that need. One of the things that concern me, and I hear my neighbor, which is at the time, speak about having the cars, the bike lane next to the curb. That is something I'm very much against. I've experienced that in Manhattan when I've gone there for business. And I find this very, very dangerous. When you have to get out of the car, one side is the traffic, as someone had mentioned. The other side, a cyclist, if you're there, curb lane. You have to look out for it. It's very, very dangerous. So I am hoping that as you contemplate the plans for expanding the lanes, and please keep in mind that there are disabled and elderly people who need to have access to vehicles. I would appreciate that, okay? Thank you for listening.
You said that you're not good at this, but I think you did pretty well. Thank you, Ms. Ross. Okay, next up, we will have Ben. All right, Ben.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben. I live in Prospect Heights, and I actually wanted to address that as well. I was thinking about what you said about the safety for folks who are seniors or folks who are disabled, and I think that's really, really important. And I think I want to echo what people have said. Right? I love that this is called like an equity forum because I think it's really important that we're thinking about can everyone in our city get what they need and go where they need to go and do that in a safe way. One thing I heard tonight that I do not think is a good idea was an idea about during the night allowing bikes on the sidewalk. I think it's a bad idea for a couple reasons. One, I think people still walk on the sidewalk at night, so we shouldn't have cyclists there. But furthermore, it sort of increases the idea that the only space that cyclists and pedestrians and anyone else who's not driving a car can have is the sidewalk. And in so many places, the sidewalks are already so thin, right? We're like sort of crammed together, that I think we can come up with more creative solutions where there are space for kids on scooters, there's space for people on scooters, and perhaps even e-bikes too, because that's another piece of equity for seniors and people who are mobility impaired perhaps, because e-bikes have shown in a way that folks who maybe aren't as able can still utilize bikes by having those pedal assists and having those batteries and things like that. So I don't know, I think we can be creative about how to use our streets because I spent a couple of years in New York driving a car, and what was notable, and I've spent years being a cyclist and years being a pedestrian, and what was really notable for me when I was driving for a couple of years was it really illuminated for me how much of the street is dedicated to the car. And so if we're going to think about a way to make things work for everybody, we need to be able to share space.
Thank you very much. Next up, we will hear from Kathy McFadden.
Hi, my name is Katie McFadden. I also live in Crown Heights. I worked as a nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit at SUNY Downstate for 5 years while I was doing my training to become a midwife. So I actually want to talk from a maternal and infant health perspective. When EasyPass went into play in the early thousands, the prematurity rate for women who lived within a mile of toll booths fell by 10%. Black women in New York City have a premature birth rate that's twice as high as the overall premature birth rate. And when you look at maps of air pollution in New York City, it's right over the predominantly Black neighborhoods. Which also, if you look at a bike of where the bike lanes are and where City Bike is and where it's safe to bike, it's a perfect overlap. We know that racism, not race, causes racial health disparities. And I think something we've not really examined much in my field is the role that environmental racism plays in those discrepant birth outcomes. So something I'm thinking about is in Crown Heights, there really isn't a place where a pregnant woman could go for a walk and be further than 25 feet from air pollution, from the toxic fumes that come out of cars. So I think I would love for us, I think in a world where people's health came first, we would shut down a lot of streets throughout Brooklyn to create space from where emissions happen and where people can exercise and be pedestrians. I just want to put in the air pollution aspect into how we think about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're doing pretty good on time. We have 15 minutes left. Next we will hear from Nora. Okay, it says Nora W, so you can tell us your last name.
I'm Nora Wolf. I've lived in Prospect Heights for 12 years and Brooklyn most of my life. Just to echo really quickly, I think cars can be a miracle, especially for disabled and elderly people, and I don't think there's a cyclist anywhere that would want to take that away from the people who need it, and I think reducing some of the cars on the road would make space for those kind of vehicles to exist and be easier to use, especially using ambulances kind of stuck behind traffic or cars not getting out of the way, and bikes move a lot faster, so I think we all want that infrastructure, especially if we're all going to be old folks one day, so we want that for us as well. My question is for DOT. Paint on the road is my least favorite bike lane, and I'm curious if there's room for paint on the road outside. Why isn't there room for paint on the road on the inside? Just an engineering question. I know a lot of times like, oh, the design of the street doesn't allow it. I'd love to know a little bit more about why.
So I mentioned it before, but roadway width, the existing roadway width, it really does restrict us in terms of design. We're working with a space that's limited, and we're also trying to meet the needs of all the users on the roadway. And when you look at a street that's say 30 feet wide, something that we have to keep in mind is the street two-way. Is the travel lane going to be wide enough? We don't want to create a condition where if we're creating a travel lane and there's an opposing travel lane, vehicles could sideswipe each other. So there's some engineering standards that we keep in mind, and just in terms of like how wide each element on the roadway has to be in order for it to be safe. Because while we understand, the frustration with the lack of vertical elements in some places, or the fact that the bike lane might not be on the inside as opposed to the outside, we can't put it in and just completely ignore those restrictions and those engineering restrictions. And that's just something that we always have to keep in mind while we're designing something.
Does that mean the swipe tolerance goes into the bike lane?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it's just for a travel lane, for example, the standard lane width that we would have to maintain is at least 10 feet. For a street that has truck traffic, we have to make sure that those vehicles can get through as well. And we also have to make sure we're not putting a bike lane in that's much narrower, because for a bike lane that's going to see heavy use, we want to make sure that people can pass each other safely. And then there are some projects where we've put it in the past where they've been much narrower, and that doesn't create a safe condition either. So that's just something that we always have to keep in mind, the space that we're able to work with.
Stay tuned for the parking for.
Right. Okay, our penultimate speaker will be Alan. Alan.
Hi, my name's Alan. I live in Crown Heights. I'm on the Community Board and Transportation Committee. And two topics that I don't think have been brought up yet is we have many relatively narrow residential streets in the neighborhood that don't see much through traffic, so generally feel safe to bike on, except when you occasionally get someone making a high-speed cut through that makes the street less safe for pedestrians, cyclists, anyone there. And I'm wondering if the DOT or anyone has considered designs that would divert through traffic and keep those residential streets like we have a lot of in Crown Heights, or there, like basically every north-south street in Flatbush is like that, to divert through traffic every 2 blocks or so. So the residential streets are for local access and pedestrians and cyclists. My other question is, what can we do to allow more bike parking and access to the express subway stations that would make people's commute shorter? Because so many people in, especially like East Flatbush or parts of the district, have either a slow bus ride or a very long walk to the subway. And if we could have better, safer bike parking at our subway stations, especially as the express stations, we could make a lot of people's commute shorter. So what can we do to enable that?
So just speaking on what you talked about diverting traffic, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
Diverting traffic from some of the local streets onto like major streets, or
Yeah, like say East 28th Street or something, like probably like a 25-foot wide street, it's all houses,
yeah,
most people
definitely.
there just go to someone's house. So how do we make it so it's good for that purpose and traffic is slow?
Okay. Well, just in terms of design on that street, when we're trying to do our redesigns of some of the narrow streets, something we take into consideration is the fact that a lot of those streets don't have any markings, especially on like some of those small residential streets. They haven't been updated in quite some time, and just something that we found to be just most effective is just making sure to establish where everyone should be on the street by putting those marking downs, and that has been shown to slow vehicles moving through that area if they know that they're going to be in one designated space. But in terms of the network in general, when we're looking at rediverting traffic, something that we've worked with a little bit, and maybe this is going to be something that we expand further, is looking at streets that are previously two-way, and maybe they're two-way in the past, but the vehicle traffic has dropped over time, or the street has changed, has become more residential, and that can be an opportunity to make that street one way, and that gives us more space to do a redesign and maybe consider putting a bike lane on it. But that comes with a lot of engineering analysis. We have to look at the entire network and see how that's going to impact the neighboring streets before we can put it in. It's not something that we haven't considered. It's just a lot of planning goes into it, and it requires a redesign of the network around that street. And as for the city rack, the bicycle parking, we acknowledge that this is something that's definitely needed at more stations. But I can't speak on city rack particularly, but what I can say is I do know that the process of getting a city rack, say in front of a building or a train station, it goes through, you would have to form a building, sorry, it's missing. You would have to form basically, what's the name? Neighborhood, a building association to essentially put in that request formally, because if you're not a business, it has to be shown that a lot of people have the need for this at this exact location. So it's something that's definitely possible. I think most people aren't aware that that process requires organization and pretty much everyone getting together and making the request for that rack at that specific location.
Question. Thank you. A lot of people seem to be concerned with the rights of the drivers not obeying the law. It doesn't seem like a lot of people, including the agencies, are overlaying the state's vehicle and traffic law with the way the bike lanes are being laid out, because I've seen bike lanes that have arrows going 2 ways, and under rules of the road for bicyclists for the state, cyclists have to go in the same direction as the vehicular traffic. Can you explain to me why we have lanes that have 2-way markings for bicycles?
So in the case of 2-way markings for cyclists, wherever you've seen that, we wouldn't we wouldn't put that kind of design in without having some kind of separation from traffic. So that's where the exception is. Like we wouldn't put it in right adjacent to the travel lanes, because the reason why that state law exists is to make sure that cyclists are not moving against traffic, because that's a more dangerous condition. If you have a head-on collision, you're more likely to incur fatality or an injury, so we wouldn't design something like that. So wherever you see a two-way path,
I will report it.
yeah, you can report it, but wherever we would put in a two-way path, it would only be where it is protected by some vertical element and separate from moving traffic.
Not the case. I will report it.
Very good. She's going to report it directly to you. So be ready. Our last audience speaker is going to be Janet. That's you? All right. Close it out strong.
Okay, I'm Janet. I have a few points to make. I don't really think I need the mic, but I'll use it anyway. First of all, in the last year, I've been hit by 3 bicycles who were doing the wrong thing. My car ran into me, running the light, ran into my car, the side and the back. So I want everybody to understand that cyclists are causing damage and harm to car drivers. Also, we have to take into consideration, I haven't heard anything about this, is that there are more people here in New York City. So with the rise in population, there's going to be more cars. And actually, there are just too many people in New York City now because everybody's crowded. And we're seeing the results on the street. So I don't know how we reduce the population, but that is certainly the main problem, one of the problems. And I would like to say that a lot of people who are advocating for the rights of the bike rider, which of course everybody should be safe on the road, I think you guys are kind of young now. But I think if you wind up breaking your leg or you get older, you're not going to feel so attached to that bike. You're going to want a car to move you around. And I think your perspective will be different. So I'm asking you to please open up your mind and not just think selfishly, but think about everybody in your community. Also, I happen to be a person who I don't just like to shop in the 5 blocks around me. I like to go to different places to shop, or I like to take excursions, long distance excursions. You can't do that on a bicycle. And a lot of times, you really can't get far on transportation, public transportation. So you have to think about the people who are not just elderly or infirm, but those people who want an option on how they want their quality of life to be. And it shouldn't be circled around a bicycle. Let's see. And I'm wondering, I guess I'll leave that for last as a question. I would like to also say that I think that if we want bicycles to be considered to be a vehicle on the road, I think I would like to see bicycles licensed. And people have to register their bicycles, and that you have to, like someone else said, you have to wear proper clothing or whatever, or else you get a fine. And I'm a little concerned about hearing so much about people willing to give up their privacy. Oh, more cameras, let's be monitored more. You gotta stop and think about what that means, okay, in the long run. Don't be frightened, because that's the fear factor. But having a bunch of cameras around, what kind of place are we going to be living in without privacy given up? Keep that in mind. Also, I would like to say, how many of those bicycle accidents that we heard about over the year was the fault of the driver? So we always keep saying the bicyclists are getting hurt and whatnot. How many of them are the fault of the driver? Because like I said, I had 3 bicycles run into me who was going against the rules of the road. So, and I'm not saying that a person who gets hurt by a bicycle, you know, we shouldn't feel for them. But you have to make sure that you follow the rules. So I just want to know how much that is the fault of the driver. Thank you.
So, let me first say, Ms. Hannah, that on the next shopping excursion, can you please bring me along? So that's one. But two, I think we've done a really good job tonight of respecting the diversity of opinion and perspective here, and I want to continue to do that. So I just wanted to say that, and then I'm going to have some of the folks on the panel speak to your last question. Anyway.
Hello, if you were hit by a cyclist and injured, I'm very sorry. You know, people walk, people drive, people ride bikes, some of us do crazy stuff. I would like to apologize firsthand. As far as, you know, being on the road, when you're in a vehicle, you know, that's 2,000 or whatever, how many tons it is. I weigh 145, my bike is 20-something pounds. I'm always riding respectfully. As a matter of fact, you can watch my crash video. If you Google my name tonight, Dulcie Canton Gothamist, you'll see two videos. A Chevy Camaro must have been going like 40, 50 miles an hour. Before he hit me, his car took air like Dukes of Hazzard, and he hit me from the rear. It's a miracle I'm here speaking to you all tonight. So, and in the video,
that's a terrible thing, but that's not my point. My point is, what about the drivers?
Allow her to finish at least. She's basically just saying
I was just gonna say, you know, the same thing in that video. I had on a helmet, I had on lights, I had on front. I was doing everything right. I just think that we all need to respect each other and be cognizant of the fact that if you're in a vehicle and you're heavy and you're fast, you can kill and hurt people. So let's just be more mindful.
Okay, so we got it right on 8 o'clock on the dot, which is amazing. I did want to offer our panelists a moment to offer any action items, anything that you think folks should be doing who care deeply about these issues.
Thank you everyone for your comments and questions. I think it's important to hear, and the main thing is that we all need to get from one place to the other. And this year, absolutely right, our population has grown 4%, in fact, from 2017 to 2018. And experts in the field predict that major cities like New York will see population growth well into the next decade. These are clear signs of this. As soon as you see buildings going up, they're not building 2-story and 3-story buildings, but much taller than that. So it is a major issue, and also the way that we live our lifestyles with the internet and e-commerce. There was an article in the paper this weekend, 1.8 billion packages delivered daily to New York. That's putting more traffic also on our streets. Everyone, in fact, does need to be aware and educated, and if you're not aware and educated, then there are resources, again, out there to educate yourself. Community boards, transportation alternatives, nonprofits, ask anyone in the room in the panel, it will definitely help. It is all about safety, and we're at a critical time now where we are seeing changes in commuting patterns, and it's not because of people like so in love with bicycles and people so in love with cars. It's just the fact that our life has changed. We're in the 21st century now. And we are the ones that are lucky to deal with this transition, or unlucky. We're the ones that have to deal with it until we can get it to where it needs to be for the future. So the action items, reach out to anyone on the panel for advice, resources, and then continue with your, I believe, your passions, and continue to fight for your stance, and I'm sure we'll come to a happy place.
I just want to thank Senator Myrie and his team, and really terrific and knowledgeable co-panelists. It's for me to be up on this panel with them tonight. For action items, I really encourage all of you to stay active in your communities. It's fantastic that you're all here tonight. It's a tremendous crowd, standing only. Join your community board or go to your community board transportation committee meetings, and don't be afraid to speak up and really help shape the streets in your neighborhood to reflect the way you would like them to be.
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you to you all for all your comments. I really liked hearing from the community and just like simple design things that I should continue to take into consideration as I continue to work on projects. I really appreciate that. And just an action item, I guess I'll echo it, but reach out to your local community boards, continue to attend meetings like this. A lot of the times, people, particularly in the bicycle unit, we're working on projects, and we can only design projects based off of our experiences and what we've heard. So if we don't hear back from you, we don't take those things into consideration. So I would strongly encourage you to continue to attend events just like this.
Thank you, Senator Myrie, for putting this together. Again, I'm the Brooklyn Organizer for Transportation Alternatives. Please go online, transalt.org, become a member for $5 a month. It makes a great difference. This gentleman right here with Flatbush here, take my card. We'll talk, but yeah, thank you for coming out, everybody.
Thank you. So I want to again thank our panelists. We really appreciate you taking time to talk to the community tonight. I want to thank all of you for coming out and really voicing your concerns. I think it is so important, I said it earlier, but I want to reiterate it, that it's important that we have honest communication in the community so that the planning is not done to us, but with us. And I appreciate that we were able to at least begin the discussion and certainly do it in a civil way. So I'm appreciative of that. I want to thank Brightpoint again. I had a co-sponsor for this event that couldn't be here, Assemblymember Diana Richardson. And I want to thank my staff. If we could give it up for them, please. Really helped put this together. So as you see on that map, we got a lot of issues in our district. So there are a lot of things for you to stay engaged on. And so please do not let this be your last time discussing this issue. Stay involved, stay engaged, and thank you very much. I do want to do one more plug. I'm always talking about the census. Okay? Yeah. Census is coming up. We are the most undercounted county in the United States. We have a lot. Sorry, I'm getting more information. We have a lot of work to do on the census, and I really want to look. Our game show theme continues. You see those fine gentlemen waving the census in the back? All right, so please spread the word. A lot of our resources, including for transportation, is based on census data alone. So we really have to engage on that front. We are also having a homeowners event, November 13th. No applause for the home. Yeah, come on. All right, there's a lot of stuff happening in our community. We have wealth that is being stolen from us, all right? And we have a job to do to protect our community. And so we have a lot of resources, agencies coming out to help our homeowners. That will be November 13th in Kings County Hospital K Auditorium. So again, thank you everyone, and get home safely.